call the meeting to order. We'll do a roll call vote to start things off. Heather, could you help us walk through that?
Recording in progress.
So I just started the recording. We're also being aired on CTN. And let me call off your names. Let me grab my list first. All right. We've got Stephen Borgsdorf.
Present in Ann Arbor, Michigan.
Great. Jennifer Cornell.
Present in Ann Arbor, Michigan.
Alan Haber.
Yes, I'm here, right in Ann Arbor, 3rd Street.
Sarah Hammerschmidt, who is not here tonight. Jeffrey Henney.
I'm here in Ann Arbor. Jeff Henney.
All right. Camila Lazundia.
Hi, here in Ann Arbor.
Great. Rita Mitchell.
You have to unmute.
Here in Ann Arbor.
Great. Alice Ralph.
Present in Ann Arbor.
Frank Wilhelm.
Here in Ann Arbor.
Adam Zemke.
Here in Ann Arbor.
And Councilmember Briggs.
Here in Ann Arbor.
Great.
All right. Thank you very much, Heather. Well, until we have the city administrator, we'll pause on that item and go to the approval of the agenda. We did update the agenda a little bit yesterday. So if you've not taken a look at it in the last 24 hours, please do. We've added a few items here that we thought to clarify and sort of remove them from member updates. One was a short-term activation update, comparable communities update, and block partners have been on there for a while, and then fundraising, long-term planning, and design. So
I never saw an agenda. Where is it? I looked for it. I couldn't find it at all.
it's on Legistar.
I just sent you the link, Alan, so that should be in your email. But yeah, it's on Legistar where they're typically.
Legislar.
You remember, Alan, I showed you how to get it from there a while back.
But you should have the direct link in your email right now.
Could we put the agenda up on the screen?
Yeah, we can do that.
I can share my screen if that's okay.
Yep. Let me make you a co-host.
Okay, perfect.
I would like that. I can't see both the screen and what's in my email. I apologize for my slow mind.
You're not, no apologies necessary. Not a problem at all. Can you see this okay?
Yes.
Yep.
I think that's it right there. We get a motion to approve the agenda
So move.
in a second.
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 All right. All in favor of the agenda as written, say aye.
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 Any nays? All right. Jen, you have your hand up. Do you have
I'm
a question?
sorry, that was just a vote. My kid came in here half in her pajamas and half not, so I had to turn my camera off and scramble. I really apologize. I was
totally fine.
so sorry.
It's all right. We all have that.
Not a
Life
problem.
continues.
Not a problem. Not a problem.
I'm gonna shut the door in
Okay.
30 seconds and rejoin fully. I apologize, you guys.
You're totally fine. Okay, so approval of the minutes from the last meeting. I do not.
I moved their approval. I had a chance to look at them. I thought they looked good in detail.
Second.
I moved their approval as written.
All right. Second. All right. All in favor, say aye.
Hi.
Aye.
All right. Any nays? Okay. All right. In that case, we're going to go into public comment. I know we've at least one person, two people now. Heather, three people. I'm probably going to screw up this calling on people. Can you help me with this?
Sure, we'll start with the phone number. They've had their hand raised for a little bit. So phone number 326, I'm gonna allow you to talk. You can unmute yourself. And it's *9 to unmute yourself. Or is it *6? I can never remember.
It's *6. Right?
*6 to unmute yourself.
Hello, my name is Jeff Crockett. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, great. I'm here to report some very exciting news. We just concluded a wonderfully successful year of activating the community garden on the plot known as N3 and another plot, C2, which Rita Mitchell knows a lot about. But we, I think many of you have seen how wonderful the garden has been. But we have continued, and we several weeks ago completed a winterization protocol. But we are also moving fast forward toward planning for 2022. And I'm pleased to announce that Joette Rioma, who is co-director of Project Grow, has joined our team and has many, many exciting ideas. And on November the 21st, we're going to have a planning meeting for 2022. And Rita, I sent out the announcement to that today to the members of the Green Team. But you are all welcome. And if you want to sort of listen to the conversation, I would encourage Rita to sort of share the Zoom link to every one of you, because I've just learned so much. It's not just about the flowers. It's about education, and it's about learning about mulching and composting and all that. It's just been a great opportunity. And I would submit to you that that expanding the garden areas, what Joette is proposing, is a great way to activate the commons. And in fact, what he is proposing is to basically match master gardeners with volunteers. And the beauty of this is that the cost to the city is nothing. And it involves the volunteer action of a lot of people. And for those of you some of you have been involved in this committee, I can tell you that it has been not just rewarding to learn about the gardens, it's been personally rewarding with the new friendships that I've made. So I'm hoping Joette gave a 45-minute speech last night at our old Fourth Ward Association meeting that was amazing. And it was about gardening and mulching and winterization and everything else. And I'm sure it can be arranged for him to come and speak to you, because he provides just a wonderful knowledge base for activating the other garden plots. Consider that there are 14 plots around the garden, and we have activated 2 of them. But in that short time, we've gotten a lot of visitors. When I attended the first fan event, there were a number of people coming up, taking pictures of the flowers on the community garden. And there were people coming up, talking to me about it. And I was explaining, and we got another volunteer. So it is generating a lot of excitement. And I hope that the Council of Commons takes another look, and I hope that we can consider a presentation sometime. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Jeff.
All right, and next we have Eric Lipson. All right, you should be able to talk.
I am. Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to speak to you today. Yesterday I spoke to the DDA about activating the space, and I failed to give Jeff Crockett and the group who did that lovely garden credit. And so, Jeff, if you're still listening, I think you guys, it's an exciting, and everything you said is just great. And those kinds of things lead to positive spin-offs I think, I'm not sure if how you're planning to plant beds or containers, but I do think that the question that people raise about the inability to grow things on top of the parking structure is sort of a red herring, considering you can park cars on it at all places. So as long as you don't exceed that load, I don't think there should be any problem. Also, just another thing, I noted that I spoke at the DDA yesterday. You know, it would be nice if more things were happening. The DDA is being very, very passive, and it's not, you know, it's not clear why. But one of their new members is actually the dean of the School of Urban Planning, and he speaks about activating public spaces. And that's really, you know, that's the kind of thing that if you could harness a U of M class or two to help you design, they are an extraordinary resource. And here's the dean on the board of the DDA. So I think you've got a link there. The other thing is, I saw that Marie Croft is also and the head of the Ann Arbor Art Association is also on the DDA. And as you may have seen, they've got some lovely installations, like on the building, the old Klein lot building there. People are already getting their pictures taken there. So the library lot leaves a lot of opportunities for installations, temporary art installations, all sorts of things. I asked Marie when she spoke to the Rotary, which I'm a member of, if they had thought about the library lot, and she said, well, we do things by invitation. So why doesn't this group or some other authorized group invite the Ann Arbor Art Association to do something on that lot? I think it's important that there be some progress shown to the public and not just more foot dragging, because that's all we see. I mean, this is like the fourth committee that's looked at this, and not much has actually happened. You know, you're moving, I know you're all sincerely attempting to move forward but the political inertia that you're facing is daunting. So I would encourage you to do more things like what Jeff Crockett and Alan Haber are doing. Alan, in fact, when I listened to the dean speak about all of the different things that Jonathan Massey is his name, by the way, that they can do on parking spaces and activating the city, and how much more cost effective it is to a city to have those kinds of activities, everything from pop-up restaurants and pop-up book sales, many of which, I should say, Alan Haber has been doing for years on the library lot. And it's shown that those have always been both successful, it's not giant, but successful, peaceful, and have demonstrated that space is an important space that can be used and should be used as promptly as possible. Just one other thing I'd like to say. The argument which I hear repeatedly, which is so irritating, that this is a dead spot, it's not active, blah, blah, blah. You know, in urban planning, they teach you that that you try to clump activities together, and it just so happens that the largest activity generators in the downtown, the district library and the bus station, are right adjacent to this. So saying that, and plus all those people who park on it, and it's right next to Liberty. So those people who say that this is a dead space, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. This space could be activated and turned into a lovely park. And now that they're talking about building something on the former Y lot, which is a totally appropriate place for a giant building to go to, all those people are going to need a park too. So I just love this group's moving forward, and I hope to see that you make some progress, and I wish you the best in trying to overcome the inertia, but trying to come up with some creative solutions. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric.
Thanks. And then we have Robert Black next. So Robert, and we have Mr. Duhoney joining us.
Thank you, Heather. It's Robert Black here again. Very nice to see you all. I'm really encouraged by Mr. Crockett and all his work. I just love hanging around him and watching what he does, and hearing Mr. Lipson's just optimistic outlook and engagement for action is really powerful. You know, I'm thinking that one of the things that since to the July 7th meeting you had, there has been a serious movement towards alignment rather than resistance or criticism and conflict. And I applaud you for that alignment that's going on. The initiating committee is working to build bridges. A meeting on October 29th with Chair Zemke and Frank and Jeff and myself, Jeff with the G, we call him, was very successful and helpful to understand strategies like broadening the political base and building alignments into the greater community, maybe holding back on the push to just dramatically change the parking so that we can, build momentum through programming, which is what you're doing right now. And I applaud you for the subcommittees, the action that's going on. And I just think that you could continue to work toward a described future vision for this thing and start to put that on paper. The work that you're doing that comes out of the task force report and this studies of other successes is really important in terms of making that described vision. And then as you work towards your goals, I would suggest two things: that you begin to write down the desired physical elements that you want on this site. I've talked about this before, and Alice Ralph knows very well about what this means. It's called programming. It's very different than activities. It's a list of the physical elements of the space. Park, garden. The garden, for example, is a great example, not just for beauty, but as an issue of food and sustainability. Much more that could be taught with that. Same thing with water, energy, waste, and all the other critical sustainable elements. The other part of having goals is to set up a time frame, and I would encourage you to pick something, maybe to partner with the library in its strategic work on Ann Arbor 200, which puts 2024 as a milestone, something to look at. And then the last thing I want to say in terms of future, the issue of sustainability is critical. And I think engaging Missy Stoltz and the sustainability group, I know Mr. Henney, Professor Henney is working on that, both within his own fiefdom at the college or university, and then building that bridge. But I think there's a certain urgency in the world to have this happen now. And I encourage you to really step up the action, set some clear goals, and begin to work more aggressively toward them. And the key word here is going to be resilience. As you move towards long-term design planning tonight, you'll see that you're not going to solve all the problems right now, but make sure that you allow for flexibility and future growth as things develop. Good luck tonight, and I'm really happy to see you again. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Robert.
Thanks, Robert.
Hey, Adam, just a couple of points of order. If people aren't participating at the moment, could they please be on mute? I was getting a lot of feedback. And yeah, thank you.
Definitely. Yep. And we'll go ahead and start muting people. Thanks, Stephen. I think we went through everybody, Heather. Is that correct? We only had the three public commenters.
That's correct.
All right, perfect. Well, in that case, we'll go ahead and head to the introduction of Interim City Administrator Dahoney. And did I pronounce that correctly, sir?
Yes, you did.
Okay,
Thank
excellent.
you.
It's wonderful to have you here. Welcome to the Council of the Commons. We are a advisory committee for the city on a particular space downtown. Really welcome you to participate in our discussions, and are appreciative that you're here this evening. We'd love to hear a little bit about you, your background. I've done some of my own homework and that sort of thing, but I think we'd love to hear about some of your background and past experiences in other communities and vision for the city.
Thank you for the introduction. My name is Milton Dahoney. I most recently worked 7 years for the city of Phoenix, Arizona. I was city manager of Cincinnati, Ohio for 8 years prior to that. I've worked in both Lexington, Kentucky, which was a merged city-county government, and also in Louisville. And while in Louisville, the last major thing I worked on before I left there was a merger of city and county government in that community as well. Over the course of my career, I've worked on extensive number of economic development projects, everything from developing the waterfront in Cincinnati, creating a streetcar system taking down stereotypical public housing developments in 2 cities and recreating a mixed income neighborhood. Recruitment of headquarters, working extensively on police issues. And then because of the size of Phoenix being the 5th largest city in the country, I've also had responsibility for coordinating major sporting events. So I've done a Super Bowl, I've done a Final Four, and I did the college championship game between Alabama and Clemson a few years ago. So my experience is pretty broad over the course of 30 plus years. And, I've worked in various organizations of various sizes. And I'm glad to be in Ann Arbor. I came here to join the community where it is and to try to advance the city, working in concert with the mayor and members of city council and the community. And that's what I'm about. So I like to focus on getting things done. And I'm very interested in learning more about this opportunity that you all are so passionate about.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining us this evening. We really appreciate it. And it seems like you will have a lot to bring to the table from your experiences elsewhere. So it was an excellent hire. So welcome. We'll go ahead and transition at this point then to member news and updates. I think there are a few things that folks had wanted to touch on here. So we'll go ahead and open it up. I know there was one attachment. Camilla wrote, I think she wrote at least, it was a really nice piece in ground cover. Do you want to kick things off with a little bit about that, Camilla?
I did indeed write it. I don't really have much to say, just that I really encourage you all to support ground cover news. It's only $2. Yep.
Any other, okay, Rita, I see your hand up.
I just want to thank Camilla for writing that and her encouraging people to be involved, which I thought was really a good part of that, the message that she sent out to the community. So thank you.
Frank?
I don't remember putting my hand up, but there it is. I just wanted to add my thanks to Camilla for the article. I thought it was really, really good, positive, and welcoming and informative. So we really appreciate that. I did want to report that Rita and I had an introductory phone conversation with Paul Sincock, the city manager for Plymouth, Michigan, this afternoon. And it was very useful, learned an awful lot. I won't try to go into detail, but those of you who are on the working group, it's quite a different model than Detroit. This is very much operated out of the city of Plymouth, and in fact, out of the city manager's office. The coordination of events and activities at Kellogg Park, which is the downtown, quote unquote, town square. And there's just a lot of energy and community cooperation and support for activities in the downtown. They really see themselves as a destination for people outside the community to take part in all kinds of festivals and concerts and activities on Kellogg Park. So we'll report more on that later, but just want to let you know that's taking place.
Thank you, Frank. Councilmember Briggs.
Yes, on less positive note, I just wanted to, this may be an item for a future agenda, but I just wanted to let you all know that I've asked for some more information from the police department around increases in criminal activity and violence at Liberty Plaza that we've been hearing. There's been shooting and a stabbing and sexual assaults that have been occurring recently. And I've asked for information on kind of what's happened this year, what has how that compares to activity across the downtown and in other parks in the city, how that compares to previous years, and kind of the steps that the community is already taking to address that. So once I get that information, I think I'll also share it with this group as well. Obviously, we often talk about activating the top of the parking lot, but our charge is the entire public space in that block. So I want to make sure that we are focusing our attention on that. And I think we've grappled with this a little bit in the past in terms of thinking about, is this really the purview of parks? I did check in with Julie Grand, Councilmember Julie Grand, who serves on PAC, and it sounds like they haven't been getting any updates on this or talking explicitly about it. So it may be, yeah, sorry, Stephen, you're also right here, so you can you can chime in. So, you know, this is maybe an area we're gonna have to figure out what, you know, is it appropriate for us to be focusing additional attention on it, or should PAC? I'm gonna guess maybe we have the ability to focus a little more closely on this area of the city. So I would welcome Stephen's thoughts on that.
I was just going to say thank you, Councilmember Briggs, for saying that and confirm that PAC has not really had a discussion about that or received information about that topic. And I would encourage you to share what information you receive with PAC or with Councilmember Grand, and she can get it to PAC, because we would certainly like to be part of that conversation.
I think this definitely is an important part of potentially a discussion around short-term activation. Obviously, I think we had been thinking more on the parking structure portion of the block, but given Councilmember Briggs' comments around our purview and potentially some of these other things, maybe that changes the discussion a little bit. So, any other member news and updates before we go into some of the other items? Yeah, Alan. Just need to unmute there, Alan.
Okay, thank you. And Camilla, very good article. I really appreciated your sort of saying how you came into Ann Arbor, how your eyes open to this community. And it's really a model for how people become involved. So, and a very good invitation to people for their involvement. And very nicely written, and I support Ground Cover, great magazine, best paper in Ann Arbor. I wanted to, this last comment on library, on Liberty Plaza. I spent considerable time at Liberty Plaza during the task force, and one view was among the people there that it would be greatly improved if the people who use the place were given more respect and recognition in some sense of a users group that has responsibility for the place, rather than them being seen as a problem and a difficult place. And they're very aware of predatory and criminal activity. I heard a lot of complaints of how this is tolerated by the police rather than policed by the police. And so I think it's really important that the conversation with the police department take place, and with the community oversight of the police be involved there. But the strength of the people who actually are there and playing chess and hanging out it needs to be better recognized. I'm very glad to see Mr. Dahoney here, and especially his say of working in conjunction with the community. And the community is affirmed that this place should be a commons, which is not a form of organization that widely practiced in the United States, though growing all over the world. And I hope your education brings you more into awareness of what's happening. The user-managed, self-managed of commonly pooled resources, rather than seeing them as organized by the government or by private corporations. So that is where the community development around the commons is very important. And we have to see the merger between the groups trying to see how do we bring existing resources together, and how from the bottom up do we bring the community resources into the process. As an activator, I'd like to report that our next program on the Commons is next Sunday, and you're all invited. It's called Growing Community. We have it's really the program is the people coming together and meeting one another, diverse, inclusive, and respectful. And a great jazz singer will be there again, as she was on the 3rd of October, our last Fun Art and Nutrition event. Stacey Murray, a jazz singer of the year from Detroit. And there'll be a student band, and there'll be more music, and there'll be some talk of history. And it should be a good time. And we've made arrangements upstairs that the sun will be out and the weather will be warmer than as was today. So the 7th of November, you're all invited, and to put your feet on this and see how the activation can actually make some very good energy, as we did on the 3rd of October and the week we had for Peace Day, Peace Week, and the various things that people have reflected that we've been doing over the years, that this place needs to be activated and can be very happily. I guess that's my report. And I asked Heather to send out the announcement of this, and she said that, well, after I announce it at the meeting, then she can send it out to everybody. So I hope you'll all get the report of the invitation to the 7th of September Growing Community. Thanks. It's also in the Observer.
Thanks, Alan. Great update. And actually, that calls attention to something. I know Heather did clarify this for us. There has a legal interpretation by the city attorney. We need to make sure that things are discussed first at a public meeting and follow-up information is provided, rather than the opposite direction. So to Alan's point, that is important. Councilmember,
if I could comment, I really think this is that the city attorney is overly restrictive in that view. If things are circulated among us and are published in our minutes and available on our website, so anyone in the public can see anything that is circulated among us, that should be sufficient for public awareness, and that we are restricted to what we can say and circulate in a meeting is a great degree of restriction. We have so little time, and to put more information into a meeting when we really don't have the capacity to absorb it, I don't believe is really the intent of the Open Meetings Act, to restrict the flow of information. The information needs to be public, and that can be by publishing anything that's circulated among us on our minutes, so anybody can see what is going on.
Alan, we're going to talk about it offline too, to see if there is a way to fix it, because obviously I think this all just came up relatively recently, and so, but we hear you on that.
Yeah. Well, it came up after the July 7th meeting when I was trying to circulate some reflections, and anyhow, I'm glad that it's on your calendar, your attention. Good.
Councilmember Briggs.
Yeah, I guess just to that point, sometimes the Open Meetings Act can feel a little restrictive, but it's there for a good reason, to make sure it's very easy for commissions to devolve in discussion unintentionally. But I just wanted to, since Mr. Dahoney is here for the first time, and I just wanted to, for the point of the clarification for the public as well, wanted to make sure you had mentioned, Alan, that the charter amendment had been to, that the community had embraced commoning for here. And I just wanted a point of clarification. It's not necessarily commoning that the charter amendment was there for. I'll just read this again. The city owned public land bounded by Fifth Ave and William Division and Liberty Streets be retained in public ownership in perpetuity and developed as an urban park and civic center commons known as the center of the city, by adding a new section for the purpose as explained above, which I didn't read the section above, but just wanted just a small point of clarification for this meeting.
It is a commons.
All right, we'll keep going into the short-term activation then. This originally was put on the agenda to provide a bit of an update as to where things stood on the resolution that was passed by this committee. But I think due to the comments that Erica brought up regarding Liberty Plaza as well, it's probably a broader discussion. I don't know, Erica, I don't want to throw you on the spot here, but do you want to talk a little bit about the update that you have from City Council side, and then we can transfer into a broader conversation?
Yeah, and just to make sure you want me to go back and discuss kind of the resolution that got brought to council and kind of where we're at with that right now. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that'd be probably a good place to start, and then we can open it up after that.
Okay, so it was in, as you will all recall, we unanimously voted to take a resolution to council, essentially looking for short-term activation of the library parking lot space with food trucks, as well as other potential pop-ups like art spaces and temporary art installations and things like that. Unfortunately, given the timing and our desire to get this in front of council, we didn't necessarily reach out and get sort of stakeholder input before taking it to council. And so we heard it along the way when it got on the agenda. And we heard loud and clear from the Main Street Area Association and some of the downtown businesses that at this point in time, it was not viewed as supportive of downtown sort of businesses to do pop-up, activate the space with food trucks right now, that they felt that was going to be detrimental to their businesses, which often we know that this isn't the case in urban areas everywhere. Food trucks are not necessarily viewed very favorably by existing brick and mortar businesses. I think certainly when Chair Zemke and I were talking about it in advance of this meeting, we felt like the feedback that we were getting was probably warranted additional conversations with stakeholders before bringing that to council. So I have had conversations subsequently with Main Street Area Association to understand a little bit more what their concerns are, and they are, I think they might always have these concerns, but they're particularly concerned obviously during pandemic times. And they have recently collected data with the art fair in terms of not having food trucks there with our recent art fair, and what the impact was to business, to their restaurants. And what they found was that there was that I can share this data. Actually, I should have shared this data probably already with the group. Much more people were visiting downtown restaurants a lot more when there weren't food trucks there. And so that has gotten them really focused in on, not wanting to see sort of more regular activation of food trucks in the downtown that might be seen as detrimental for the restaurants. And I would say that if we were not in pandemic times, I might have a different sort of viewpoint of this. Personally, having heard some of that feedback, it helped, it has made me concerned that maybe this is not the right time to introduce that. And it's, I'm not particularly, I think we might not want to start with a short-term activation that is not viewed as particularly supportive to our downtown businesses right now. So I think one of the charges to us may be to think about, are there ways to amend that resolution? Is there interest in amending that resolution to consider some of the other items that we discussed in our work session in the summer? And then also, as Chair Zemke just mentioned, how does this relate to Liberty Plaza right now? If we're really thinking about the health of that downtown block, is there an area that we might want to be focused in on with activation more immediately, like Liberty Plaza? So that is my update on that.
Any questions at all for Councilman Briggs? Jeff, you're up.
Yeah, thank you very much, Erica, for doing that work and making those contacts. It's good to be interacting with the folks, and we have to be concerned about this. But, you know, I don't see us, I mean, it's nice to have food trucks at these events, but I don't see them as being fundamental or essential. There are other things to be done and other ways to get food to people. One of the problems that, you know, I encountered when I was doing the fan event was, you know, I went to some of these restaurants and said, can you be there? We would be delighted to have you bring food there and so forth. And their big problem was, they said, Jeff, you know, we'd love to, but we don't have the staff to do it. And what their problem is, I mean, in particular, the Jerusalem Garden folks, right? He said to me, you know, I've got all the business, I have more business than I can handle. My problem is I don't have people. I don't have, you know, cooks and servers and so forth. So I'm a little confused, and maybe you can clarify for me, Erica, what the problem these folks have that you've encountered or talked to, because the word is they don't have enough people to meet the demand they have right now, let alone demand that one food truck might take away from them. Anyway, just interested in your view on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I mean, obviously businesses are everywhere are struggling with staffing issues, and certainly downtown restaurants are amongst those in terms of being able to expand. This is not the easiest time to ask them to do that. I think it's I haven't heard so much concerns around, you know, the one-off sort of activation with food trucks, though I didn't specifically ask that question about kind of where's the tolerance level. But more generally, I think our proposal was talking about more frequent and regular activation via food trucks. And so that was one of the concerns there. So I'm not sure such an issue for an event like the fan events, and more so something that if city staff is working on activating a downtown space and putting together a proposal for the regular activation of that space with food trucks and on an ongoing basis, that is something that is not viewed as necessarily supportive of the existing downtown restaurants that are struggling. So there's that. I did ask one piece I didn't update on. I did ask if, you know, how would you like to be involved in terms of, you know, coming up with a proposal that might be viewed as something that is more supportive. And while there was appreciation for us asking that, there's just a lack of bandwidth right now to be able to really focus outside of you know, for the Main Street Area Association anyway. It was, you know, we really need to focus on the health of this area. And so appreciate the invitation, but it's going to be hard to come up with brainstorming about, you know, another area of downtown. So.
All right, I think we've got a few people on deck here. Frank, and then Alice, and then Ria.
I don't want to jump ahead to another item on the agenda, but in our conversations with David Cowan from the Downtown Detroit Partnership, food trucks are a growing and dynamic part of their presentation of activities in the downtown area. They work very closely with the local businesses, the brick and mortar businesses. They're careful not to put competing products from a food truck to a standalone brick and mortar restaurant. It's gotten to the point where some of the brick and mortar restaurants have purchased their own food trucks because they see the value of that as a business extension. So I think we're dealing with a short-term issue with the pandemic and a need for some serious education on the part of the Main Street Business Association. This works in all places, you know, the city of Detroit, which has made a tremendous comeback in the downtown area, which hopefully they match in the neighborhoods. We did not specifically address this topic with our conversation with Mr. Sincock today, but I've been at events over in Plymouth, and I see a lot of food trucks. There's a way for this to actually stimulate business in both directions, and so we can't let this be the final word. Again, I think it's hopefully a short-term issue with the pandemic, and we just need to do a lot of education in every direction.
Thank you, Frank. Alice, and then Rita. I think you're muted, Alice.
I had to get my cursor on the right place. Yeah, just a small point. As Erica mentioned, the data that the MSAA had, I think that data should be available to look at in context of not just that one data point. It did strike me that if no food trucks were at the art fair, then of course there would have been more activity at the brick and mortar restaurants. People want food. Maybe there was something more to that. It just seemed like, I don't want to use the word specious, but I will. It seemed sort of a strange thing to promote their business, that it just seemed odd. Did anybody else react to that? I mean, yeah, if there are no food trucks, where are people going to get their food? At the brick and mortar places. It seems like that is just perhaps a characteristic of the art fair, because I know the food trucks there have in the past been not exactly stellar, sort of circus food, I guess, is what I noticed. And I always went to the brick and mortar. When I went to the art fair, I always went to a brick and mortar restaurant when I was downtown. So I think that data point, as well as some others, might require some context in order to get past the resistance or the misunderstandings that are currently swamping us in that one area of activation potential. That's all I wanted to comment on.
Alice, Rita, then Alan.
Thanks. I just have a question about the boundary of the Main Street Area Association, because from my estimation of it, if it is really Main Street, then we're 2 blocks away. So my question is just, where is the competition boundary? And I'm very interested in the data as well. I agree that the types of food are very different that bring people to a food truck versus a brick and mortar restaurant. But our discussion, as Frank mentioned, with the Detroit group, is that you bring people together with the food. So, and that is consistent with conversations I've had in the community, that people are saying that they would go to something in the center of the city, and that food would be a good part of that to bring people together. If we had tables and chairs where people could sit with their food and not worry about balancing their drink, that would be a plus. So I actually don't want to have food be the main focus or the only focus of what we talk about with activation. But I just wanted to raise those particular points right now. Thanks.
Thanks, Rita. Alan, you're up.
Thank you. So when we had this discussion, the topic was, what is the first thing we should do toward activation? And the answer was, we should bring food to the commons. And then the next step was in that conversation, well, that's food trucks. Though there was another view, so not necessarily food trucks, but the main idea was to activate this place, there should be, like Rita says, tables and chairs and benches and so on, where people could eat and socialize and so on. And food trucks is an easy way of thinking how to bring food. But another way that was also in discussion is to look at the restaurants in the immediate area and see this as a carryout place, and some group like the Booper bikes being a transit. So you call in with your little QR code on the table to whatever restaurant you like and order what you want, and the Booper truck bike picks it up and brings it to you in 5 minutes after it's delivered. And so, but there's another way of doing it than food trucks. And when we tried to do it on October 3rd, there actually weren't any trucks available, which is how come we didn't really do food trucks. But the main question was, activation requires that people be comfortable there and be able to have some food. And so there are many ways that we could do that when we do it for the event, like for the for on next Sunday. We'll have some food there from different restaurants and so on, and maybe the Food Not Bombs will bring some food. And Fridays at the Liberty Plaza, there's pizza that gathers people around there. But the main idea was to activation really has food as part of the process, and how we do that. And when we began the meeting, maybe there'll be a report later on of the block partners. And I put out a list of who seemed to be the block partners, but added to that in the nearby and relevant. And that was also, that includes the Main Street, the State Street, business associations, and others that have an interest in the area. So we have to see our block really as extending beyond just the block. And that became part of the process of the Block Partners Working Group. So you'll see more about that as that group develops. And we should have anticipated in council ahead of time when we develop the food truck and when we develop any notion of what we're going to do there, that the people who have their eye on what's going on should get an idea, should get a heads up as to what we're talking about before we lock it into a council resolution and advice.
Thanks, Alan. Jen.
Thanks, Adam. I think if we're on the topic of immediate activation, one thing that's become increasingly, I guess, confusing to me is when we consider that Liberty Plaza is there and it's a space that's already set up, it doesn't require removal of vehicles it's a space that's already there. And when we talk about things like the food truck and plants and, using that space for large installations, whether it be something from, large planters to a fountain, it doesn't matter. Is there a desire by this group to start with the footprint that's existing and already built with benches and tables and things that we're talking about putting into this other space to activate it? Why wouldn't it seem prudent to activate the space that's already there with benches, tables, chairs, and maybe expand from that? So maybe pull the community into the vision of what the commons could be by showing what a regular activation of that space could be, and then maybe creating demand to expand it from there, right? So I don't know that has been a conversation that we've talked about a lot, and I almost feel like we jettison Liberty Plaza in favor of figuring out what to do with a parking lot that isn't set up for that versus let's maximize a resource that's there and just begging for activation. And I don't know that we've ever had a serious in-depth conversation for it, but I, for one, would be all for it. And I think it's something that we should evaluate as a working group.
So I'd like to make a suggestion on this, and I'd like to make the suggestion for two reasons. One, because we are rapidly approaching the 8 o'clock hour and we have a lot on the agenda still, but also because I think this topic, especially in light of the information that Councilmember Briggs provided at the start of the meeting, we need to have probably a working group formed to talk about activation. I think the point that Jennifer just made is a very valid one. And so I'd like to suggest that for two reasons, we can move on to other items on the agenda, but also really to get some work done on this, that we form a working group similar to, I don't know if that's a correct term or not. Eventually we'll figure out what the title of these groups are. But subcommittees, working groups, teams, whatever you want to call them. This is a battle I have at work every day. Some type of subgroup here, similar to the comparable communities, similar to the block partners. And I'd like to suggest that we table this item and put it into that type of structure. Can we get a show of hands? Yeah, good. Any opposed? Okay. Now the fun question is who wants to be on it. So Alan does. I think Jen, you should be on it, and maybe we get a show of hands too. Councilmember Briggs, and we can take it offline here. If there are other folks that'd like to be on it, send us an email. but we'll have the three of you, and I think we can have two more spots before we hit a quorum issue. Administrator Mahoney.
I'd like to participate if that's okay. I understand part of why there is resistance to what you're talking about. So I'm willing to get with the folks and see if my 2 cents can be helpful.
I'm sure it will be. We appreciate your volunteering for that. Thank you.
Thanks.
And Alice, did you have your hand up to volunteer, or did say anything?
I think Mr. Mahoney would be a perfect member of that small working group. And I also think there's a term that comes from our enabling ordinance that is the correct term, but I can't recall it at the moment. I hate to be the traffic director or something, but as we have noted in our comparable communities groups, we don't want to get it too large because that constitutes a quorum, and we just need to keep it to, I think you got 4 right now, and that's probably as far as we can go.
I think that's
unless they are not on our, you can enlarge it with members that are not in this commission.
I think that's right. I think that we're at the max with the Administrator Mahoney on. So, am I right on that, Heather?
Yes, that's right. And working groups is a great term. Yeah, I would say go with that.
Okay, excellent. So we'll form that one. Jen, maybe you and I can talk offline, or if you'd like to do that, put together an email and get things started, and we'll add that report out from that group to this agenda at the next meeting here. So with that, if we could go into the next item on the agenda this evening, the comparable communities update. I was going to provide a bit of a verbal update. And before we get into that, we'll go to Alan. But I was going to provide a bit of a verbal update. There are several other members who are present this evening. Sarah would be one who is not, who is very involved. But Rita and Frank have been very involved as well, and I would certainly invite them to also provide some updates. Before that, Alan, did you have a question?
I just read, when we set up the comparable communities group, we did basically the same process that never appeared in the minutes because we didn't have a formal resolution and a formal vote. I think this was a formal decision that we made, and it should appear in the minutes that we made a decision what the function and mission of this little group is and who is on it and anything like that. I don't know whether the minutes that we approved from the September meeting that were I noted in October that we didn't really recognize that this comparable communities group was approved, but these little working groups that we set up should be approved in the minutes, even though we don't make a formal motion and all that. That's what I wanted to say.
When the last group was formed, I reflected that in the minutes. Technically, you don't need to reflect when there's an informal decision, only when there's a formal vote. I will also state that it gives you, when it's a less formal group, you are able to be a little bit more nimble and be able to meet with not providing notices and things like that. So this allows the group a little bit more opportunity to meet informally and to have discussion and be able to communicate with each other between meetings. But I'll reflect and, I'll make a note in the next minutes that this was an informal decision that was made.
Thank you very much, Heather.
Mm-hmm.
Frank, did you have a question?
Just a clarification. What the maximum size of a working group can be before it bumps into the Public Meetings Act. I thought it was larger than 4. Maybe I'm not counting properly tonight, but What is a quorum? Have we wrestled that to the ground?
It actually is in the bylaws what the quorum is, which I think is 7. It got a little bit skewed because Councilmember Haimner is not a part of this group currently, and the city administrator wasn't a part of this group. So it kind of made things a little bit vague there for a minute. But ultimately it's 7 once we're fully up and running again. I think we're safe with 5 as the number.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. So with that, we'll go into the comparable communities update. I will provide a little bit of context, and we've heard some of this already, but we had spent a considerable amount of time developing a series of questions that spoke to a variety of topics, and those topics ranged from organizational structure for space management, organizational structure around the organization actually managing the spaces, be it if it's municipal or private or nonprofit, or a partnership based between any one of those options. We talked a lot about budget, staffing. We talked about community outreach, concerns regarding making sure that we were not being inequitable, and that other communities were taking those things into account. We developed questions regarding safety, inclusiveness. I think we had a very diverse array of discussion points. We utilized our questions to try and do research ahead of time before we set up a Zoom with the first city. And the first city we elected to pursue was done, I think, out of 2 reasons. One, out of convenience, because Frank and Rita had previously spoken with the gentleman and had a good contact, but also because of the potential opportunity and similarity in some cases with some of the spaces that the gentleman was responsible for. And we ended up speaking with I think he's got a very cool title. It's a public space. It's not director. It's much chief. Yes, yes. Chief of Public Spaces for the Downtown Detroit Partnership, David Cohen. Very enthusiastic guy around public spaces, and gave us 2 hours plus, I think, on Zoom to talk through a whole series of questions with him, and then has done some follow-up. We talked about really answers to a lot of these questions, and then from a process standpoint, we followed up with one another. Each took parts of that discussion, broke them down, and answered the questions individually, and then compiled it together. And so we tried to create a full roadmap, written roadmap based on the questions we had created, as well as the video. And so, and I believe that there is a discussion of getting together to go down and meet with David in person as well. So that was the process we employed for the first community. I think the plan is to replicate that same process with several other communities we've identified, some in Michigan, some elsewhere. It's an ongoing list. So certainly if you have suggestions, would love to hear them. Just to provide some context to what was talked about, there were several spaces that the Downtown Detroit Partnership manages. They really are a space management organization in this role, at least. They do a lot of other things. And they manage private and publicly owned spaces. They do a lot of activation, a lot of programming. They handle things from a safety and security standpoint. They handle things from a programming and planning aspect. They are really, by what appears to be any public-facing view, the chief manager of the spaces, and they do it in 9 spots downtown in downtown Detroit. The ones we talked about most were Campus Martius, Capitol Park, and the last one I forget, but it's built on top of a parking lot. And it's an important one because there's a former gubernatorial statue there as well. I don't remember which one, but somebody will probably.
Grand Circus.
Grand Circus. There you go. Thank you. And we talked a lot about, all of the spaces are built on top of concrete. There's city owned pipes and things going on beneath all of them. They all have their own, hurdles, but there's a strong commitment by the Downtown Detroit Partnership to make things work and have them be enjoyable and activated and inclusive. And they have really, frankly, a very robust operation that involves a lot of pre-planning before things come online in a new space, and a lot of community engagement beforehand and throughout the activation and the continued programming experiences. They hire members from the community to help handle sort of ambassador type roles to ensure that the staff that is there on site continually is not just security. They do take security seriously and crime seriously, but they try and be, I think, progressive and inclusive with their approaches to populations throughout the city. And so I thought it was a really good discussion. It was certainly an eye-opener. And I think that the partnership model that they've established is very interesting and certainly spurred a lot of thoughts in my head around how this could be something that we could replicate for this block as a potential option. And so it does allow them to do a lot of private fundraising for activation and maintenance of the spaces. They raise revenue through a variety of sources, including fees and things like that. They are supported by the municipality in the publicly owned spaces only through the use of comped electricity and water. Outside of that, the municipality does not pay them to manage the space. They do that and then raise the funds privately is what the model is based on. And so it was very interesting. Did not expect it to be a sort of a space management organization in this regard, but it really is. And they've clearly put a lot of time and effort into this. I think that, I think that would be it from at least my summary of things. But the video is there. We can certainly provide it if you'd like to sit through it. It was a very interesting conversation, frankly. And I'm looking forward to future ones as well. Alice has got her hand up, but before I get to Alice, just would like to see. Alice, you're on the working group, so please feel free to go next. And if there's others, please feel free to add in.
Yes, I appreciate your summary of very dense or just complete discussion, and more than one discussion really in our contact with David Cowan. One of the things that really inspired me was the fact that they were dealing with a number of parks and turning them into a geography that was connected from the center of Detroit to the river. It may seem absurd at first to look at our situation as similar, but I mean, I remember Jeff Henney was talking about thinking out of the box and thinking beyond the boundaries and so forth. And then we're talking about, what is our, we can't think about our block as an isolated place. We have to think about the adjacencies and the people, the paths to the center and so forth. And I started looking at our own city, and I saw the potential somehow, maybe a little less direct in terms of the street layout and the things that are between the center of the city and the Huron River. But there is potential to kind of synthesize or coordinate or make legible by the public this connection of the center of the city to beyond by the distance, the places between the center of the city and the Huron River, including the train station, Wheeler Park, and you start working up and you can kind of see this not really a corridor, but a section that offers a lot of diversity as well as a sense of place. But this would be the main thing, sort of like the grand circus of whatever else we could connect to it. It may not be even hit the direction of the train station, but I think we have these street conversions from one way to two-way traffic that will really influence how we look at this place. And we still don't have enough information about those plans, even though they're underway at this moment. So I'd like to call attention to the things that will affect our development of the heart of the city that are ongoing, that we need to be part of, and that we need to bring others to be in that part, in this project, to make it really integral to the heart of the city.
Thank you, Alice. Rita.
Excuse me. I just want to contribute just an observation from one of the discussions with David Cowan about the process they use for organizing the activities. And I was just impressed, and I would love to see their spreadsheet that they use, because they have this way of addressing inclusivity and trying to make sure that they have people in groups from the immediate circle of the parks to outlying rings to farther out, but also types of groups, women-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses. They have a plan for making sure that they have a breadth of inclusiveness to how they program the space that I thought was pretty impressive. And we haven't even seen the details of it, but just the brief description was really helpful, I think, and we could use a model for that. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Rita. Frank?
Yes, I would just echo that it was a very rich, robust conversation. And with our conversation this afternoon with Paul Sincock, there were one parallel, but many differences between how Plymouth approaches this and Detroit. But the common denominator is very enthusiastic, strong, direct business community involvement. The business community sees the benefit of vibrant public spaces, attracting people for, in some cases, very large-scale events, but just consistent programming throughout the year, and how that just adds to the business vitality, the vitality of the community, etc. So I would think that we can, over time, bring our own business community into a more participatory process where they'll see the value as well.
Definitely. Thank you, Frank. Well, I think it's this is an ongoing discussion. Detroit was the first stop. We're going to be talking to Plymouth soon, and many others. And so, as I indicated previously, if you have ideas of places where we should take a look, let us know. We're going to keep this as a standing item on the agenda until we decide otherwise, and we'll provide updates. And so, a lot of offline work as well here. It's a great working group. And Alan, did you have a question on this topic, or did you want to go into the block partners? I think you're muted.
looking at other communities, Stratford, Ontario had a parking lot that they turned into a very vibrant place, and they just got an award for the light show that they did last winter and maybe the winter before. So look at Stratford, Ontario. Tom Stolberg has been working there and has put out periodically material on Stratford. It's been very, very, very interesting. So I would have us add that to our purview. Thank you.
Thank you. So done. I think with that, we can move on to the next agenda item, which is an update from the Block Partners Working Group. I think Councilmember Briggs is going to take us through some things, as Sarah is not available to be here tonight.
Yes, Sarah is called to 2 meetings tonight. Planning Commission 1 out. So our subcommittee for Block Partners is Sarah and Jen and myself and Alan and Jeff. And we met yesterday, I guess, and had a good sort of introductory meeting, did some brainstorming. Thanks to Alan for coming with a list of, block potential, who those partners are up front. And we added some additional names to that, and we're going to be expanding from that. So one task will be really identifying who these partners are, because you can understand, we've been sort of talking about adjacent partnerships, but we saw that in the case of, activation, the Main Street Area Association definitely saw themselves within kind of the purview of folks that would ideally like to be reached out to on subjects. So I'm going to be doing some collecting contact information for those folks. Heather, I'll reach out to you, and you may already have some of the contact information for some of the groups. Otherwise, I'll be doing some door knocking of sorts downtown and trying to get some more, or internet searching. So that's one, and we came to the conclusion of kind of first step would be doing developing an institutional / business survey to collect some sort of preliminary information around how folks would like to be engaged, and then also kind of their sense and desire for the space. And so Sarah's going to be taking a first draft of that survey, and then we're going to be coming together and this next in a couple of weeks, I guess, and working to refine that more. So I guess for others, if there are, did I miss anything? Any highlights of that meeting for those who were there? Okay. The other thing I'll add is go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, absolutely spot on what you said. Just wanted to add that some discussion did take place about sort of models out there, which of course spills into what was talked about before, to get people's minds working, because, people don't necessarily have in their own minds the benefits or the excitement of what could be on the site at this point, because they've been so preoccupied with the pandemic and their own issues. And so if they get a survey without any context, it might not be as effective as it could be. So we're talking about the potential for providing some context, and one way to do that would be to have a way to go for people who are filling out the survey to go look at some examples of exciting things that were done in other cities in terms of, parks, in terms of building structures, design, and activities. So that's just what I wanted to say. We might want to look at that possibility.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for adding that. The other piece I wanted to provide an update on to the group is I also met with Mike Martin, who's the president of First Martin Corporation, yesterday. And obviously one of the things we discussed as a group was that there are a lot of stakeholders, but there are also some key partners along that block in terms of things that may happen with those institutions may fundamentally shift how that block functions. And First Martin is one of those partners. The Ann Arbor District Library is another one. So in terms of how that conversation went, things pertinent for this group would be that I mentioned Liberty Plaza being of particular interest right now. They also have concerns about the increase in dangerous behavior in that space, and but noting that it's been something that has happened for a number of years, and so that's an area that they have an interest in being, kind of actively thinking about and being engaged around, and also wanted to note that, when it comes to design solutions that may help aid that space, sometimes there's been discussions in the past about how, well, maybe, First Martin may be redoing the building that they have along Liberty, and so we can't redo Liberty Plaza until that's happens. And they said, no, that's not the case. Feel free to get going on that as soon as you'd like to, and if you do, we would probably be a very interested funding partner in that. And so that goes to the conversation I think that Jen mentioned earlier around maybe starting with that space is also, there's some additional, there may be funding partners excited to help out with that. So trying to think about other key takeaways for this group. I guess big pieces, they're happy to do a survey. It's going to be hard with everything that's going on to be engaged regularly in a more formal process, in terms of ongoing stakeholder meetings or things like that. So they'd rather be, participate in a survey and then occasionally, have conversations around the subject.
Excellent. That sounds great. Alan, you had unmuted yourself and I muted you back just so we didn't have any feedback. Did you want to talk? And then we've got a couple of others. Frank, go ahead. Alan, you're muted still. I apologize.
My only comment is that even though this is an ongoing situation at Liberty Plaza and it's negative, it's contentious, it's all of those things, but there's also an opportunity here with our new city administrator, the police oversight committee. It could be that this could be the catalyst of something important happening for the whole block. And so I want to, emphasize the positive potential of focus and activity around the issues of Liberty Plaza.
Alan, you're up, then Rita.
So I wanted to, in the list of block partners, I sort of divided it into institutions, businesses and such, and then individuals. And I wanted to see how do we look at, as partners in this, all the people who are actually the staff in the different organizations, and also the people who live in the Denali building, the other apartment buildings, and so on. That in terms of the commoning, it is the people that they're working together that actually animate the place. And so in some way we have to see how those people who live there, who are there regularly as staff or as residents, are drawn into the process. And we basically decided, well, let's look at the institutions, the businesses first, but keep in mind that it is the people who actually are the drivers of the animation of the place, and the people who are closest are very much central in that, or will become so. So I just wanted to make clear that there is that distinction between the staff who are actually on the block and then the people who have what's, I guess, called stakeholder responsibility. And the Martin people are down on Depot Street, and the credit union people are on Huron Street. But the staff there are really very interested in what we are doing. So Mute up again.
Thanks, Ellen. Rita, did you want to say something? Okay. Frank?
It just occurred to me. Block partner.
I think your mic is covered up, Frank.
Ugh.
You're good now.
Okay, sorry. I guess
I think it's the same thing. I think you're covering it up with your hand on accident or something. You're good now.
The people who frequent Liberty Plaza are part of the block partner group in a sense. They need to be engaged and understood and worked with. And so that was my only point.
So I think this is a really good conversation. I'm glad that things are moving forward, and I think we'll keep same thing as the comparable communities. We should keep this conversation going and look forward to the survey instrument and results from that. Rita?
Sorry, I did think of something new. I hope Steve is still here, because I'm hoping that we can clarify the involvement of city parks with this space as we look into activating it, because it is part of it. So I'd just like to point that out.
Steve, you might get voluntold to join some of these discussions by nature of your liaison role.
That's fair. I mean, I guess one of the questions I've always had in the back of my mind, this discussion today has kind of raised it a little bit. Is the space a park? Does the Parks Department have dominion over this space as it does the other 130 plus parks in this town, or not? I don't think it does at the moment. Otherwise, we would program it. We would have trash cans there. We would have staff there doing things. Like, we don't have any of that. We don't have a clear statement that it's within the parks or not. Kempf House is, Liberty Plaza is. This common space, I think if you ask Alan, if you ask the townspeople, you may get a muddled answer as to whether or not this is within the parks. I think if you ask the Parks Department, I don't know if it's 100% clear either. And so that's one of the challenges I think we have. If we want to program the space like it's a park, it needs to be a park.
I can add clarification to that. It is technically considered a park in the sense that it was called that in the proposal. But whether or not we put it in the Parks Department is really up to us, the city. So that's something that this body could recommend. I do have to caution, though, that if it goes into our Parks Department, then it gets evaluated as against all the other parks. So the resources that would be allocated to this would be, divided again, with all the other parks, basically. So, so on the one hand, then it has a home in the city. It has a department to sit in. Right now, it doesn't have any department, if it went to parks, and that, and PAC would play a strong role in determining basically the future of this space. So right now it's sitting outside of that, but that is something that's expected of this group, more or less, is to come up with a recommendation with if you want it to have a home in parks, and if so, understanding that it then goes through that process of being evaluated against other park spaces for resources, or if you want it to function as something different. And if it's something different, then what is your recommendation on how that functions?
I think this is a important discussion, and certainly the really is part of the recommendation of the ultimate planning recommendation of this council. But I think to the point that's been made by a few folks this evening, it sounds like what we're talking about, because the space that is under our purview is really the whole block, that includes areas that are currently managed by Parks, as well as the Parks Department, which of course is including Liberty Plaza here. So I think that, maybe it's best right now we operate in a shade of gray on this, so that knowing that we have a lot of different types of organizations managing areas. And if we want to provide a clear recommendation with something that is inclusive of everything in our purview, we should probably do that.
Yeah, I should have noted that I was specifically referring to the library lot in terms of being in that kind of gray area, but Liberty Plaza and Kemp House are under Parks currently. Yeah, so you could develop a recommendation about how all three are handled together or something specific to the library lot.
For sure. Thank you, Heather. We've got a few folks here. Alice, then Rita, then I think Jen, and then Alan.
Okay. Just a short one. You spoke of the gray area that between looking at parks and non-parks and special properties and so forth. It's really the zoning of public land. And if you look at the uses of public land, there are many and various, and the city, I would interpret that as city council has a lot of say in what happens with those gray areas. Railroad stations, various things, public housing, so on and so forth. If it's public land owned by the public, then that is a gray area. So we have part of what our job is to define this part of that gray area in a way that's constructive and integrative, and it's a big challenge. And I'm glad we're still at it. Thanks.
Thanks, Alice. I think Rita, then Jen, then Alan.
Thanks. I just pulled up the pros plan, and I know that it's going to be reviewed really soon. But there's quite a number of mentions of Liberty Plaza and making improvements. So I hope that there has been some work done on it that we just don't know. And if not, this is a great time for us to move it forward, I think. And I would just recommend that we include the pros plan and discussion of the pros Parks, Recreation, and Open Space plan in our review of information. Thanks.
Thanks, Rita. Jen, then Alan.
I want to, I guess this is sorry to put you on the spot, Heather, but I think this is a question for you. When you talk about Kemp House and Liberty Plaza being part of Parks already, is there a way for this group to, I know that we did not have the person from the Parks Department, it was not available when we had a previous meeting where we invited, them to be a guest. Is there a way just for you to share, even if it's over email, what resources are currently, what does activation at Liberty Plaza look like? Like, what are we, if we operate under the notion that to build on what is already there and being supported by the city functions, and then extend outward to create this center of the city area that is activated on a regular basis, I think it'd be really helpful for us to understand what it looks like currently outside of the very obvious Sonic launch, right? Like what else? And I know that that's activated by, a private entity within the or within the city. So I think it'd be really helpful for us to understand what we're already dealing with and what resources we might be able to maximize some ROI on, and, maybe start there and build from. But I'm totally clueless as to what activity or resources from the city are already being devoted to Liberty Plaza.
Certainly, yeah, I can send along the pros plans, for example, and other materials that have focused on Liberty Plaza. And then I can also I can go back again and see if somebody from the Parks Department is able to join us. Colin had originally planned on joining us and then had a family emergency. He's also in the process of retiring. So there's, the Parks Department is getting a little thin there. So I'll see if somebody's available, and I'm sure they'd be willing if they are available. So I'll see if I can have somebody join us and give a little bit more background. Because there is, my understanding is, and I don't know that I'm reflecting this completely accurately, but so just, take it with that caveat. But there's a philosophical approach to Liberty about not necessarily doing a lot of intervention with the design or programming of it, because the people using that space, our residents, our citizens of this community, being used. Now with the uptick in crime that's occurring, if that's really the trend that we're going in, then we need to do some sort of intervention with the behavior. But there's no real effort to want to remove, the people that are currently utilizing that space.
So this is a follow-up, sorry, Ellen, this is really a good follow-up, is the idea that would there not be then support from parks to activate that space on some way on an ongoing basis versus a few weeks a month during the summer? I guess that would be something for the Parks Department to address, but I would assume that as citizens of the city, the folks that are in the park on a regular basis would also enjoy whatever activation would be beneficial to the community as a whole, right?
Yeah, and I guess we'll have to have the Parks Department really speak on this a little bit more. But right now, I mean, my understanding of is that the parks don't do a whole lot for programming the same way, they wouldn't do a lot of programming for the library lot. That it's really this process that's already in place where it's a special event. So it's private entities that are coming forward and asking to use the space. So that's just something that, I encourage this group to think about. Maybe that's really our low-hanging fruit with activation, is just getting the word out. And that's something that I could work on with our communications department right away, just getting the word out that exists, because I'm not sure that people know that, because if we can have more nonprofits, agencies renting the space, so to speak, to do an event there, then it gets activated.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think that seeing the pros plan will be very helpful. Thank you for that, Heather.
Yeah.
Alan and then Rita.
Yeah, right now we have sort of a hodgepodge situation, and I expect that will continue with Martin Company doing some things on Liberty Plaza and the parks, and whatever else happens. And there is the management of the Library Lane, there's Kemp House. All the city properties are designated as part of the commons. And just to look for the long range, what I see as developing as we get to the long range is that all these properties will be joined together in some kind of land trust that will be managed by some group of users and participants in the development of this collective area. And it will have links with the Parks Department, with the Historic District, with the local residents around. In the diagram, structural governance diagram that we put together in the initiating committee website, it showed a relationship between the many participants in the governance of this area. And ultimately, I see that would be some form of democratically managed land trust, but that is down the road a while. But that is what I see and what basically the commons tends to develop as around the world, and I think would be well in Ann Arbor. So I just wanted to put out that sense of, in the future, some sense of drawing these properties together in some form of democratic management as a land trust, perhaps similar to how the tree line has developed and may come to develop as all the elements of that set of neighborhoods comes to function together.
Thank you, Alan. Rita, did you still?
No, in the interest of time, I'll pass. Thanks.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay. So thank you, Erica, for that update and a lot of good feedback there. We will continue to have a Block Partners update on the agenda. The next thing that we had on the last agenda, we didn't get to it, was a discussion around fundraising. Councilmember Briggs was very successful in her attempts to procure some planning dollars for our efforts. And you could see the next item on the agenda after fundraising is the long-term planning. That was the other item we didn't get to last time. So, I'd like to put on the table, I think there is some interest or sentiment that we have some private funding to go along with this $40,000 that Councilmember Briggs secured in the city budget. I think that there is a place for having a fundraising working group, frankly, to try and figure out what our strategy is going to be on this. But I think that, as we get into the long-term planning, this fundraising piece, we need to have some runway figured out. And so I'd like to just bring up the topic for discussion here. And I personally would like to serve on a working group around this topic, because I think it's going to be very important for our ultimate success. Frank?
Frank, you need to unmute.
I agree with you, Adam. There are, kind of separate efforts going on. Erica's good work on the city council budget. The Library Green Conservancy has been active fundraising approaching a year. I was hoping that we'd be further along towards our initial goal of $100,000. We are past the halfway mark, but progress has been slower than I would like. And it's not reluctance on the part of donors. It's just the ability to engage them over the summer. And some of the people who I thought could be more active have had some health issues that have constrained that. But I'm looking forward to a more active period going forward, and hopefully achieve that $100,000 goal. I'll say early to mid next year. It's very hard, as I explained in conversation with Erica, and she knows from her own professional life. It's very hard to predict the pace of fundraising because it's in the hands of people other than yourself to make those decisions. Again, I can't speak for the board of Library Green, but I think there's interest in moving forward in collaborative ways on various aspects of this work.
Jeff, you got your hand up.
Yeah, I think that you're absolutely right. This is a very key and important area. And I would like to, in the interest of thinking a little bit out of the boxes, as Alice has said, to suggest, put forward the thought that maybe what we need is some kind of accelerant that will get people focused and excited about thinking about contributing financially. And my thought was that even though this is kind of early days yet, it might be exciting and stimulating for everybody if we sponsored part private, part public, so some of those design dollars from the city and maybe some from our Library Green, or we raise some additional ones, that we sponsored a competition. And it wouldn't be a competition to necessarily come up with a final design that anybody would implement, but it would just be a competition to get the community and other parties, maybe beyond the state, intrigued and interested about how they would imagine what we would do with this whole block in their imagination, and the various structures or layouts or things that could could happen, and we could have a competition that would be open to all, and then a juried competition, and then the finalists would get some kind of obviously some kind of financial reward for doing it, and this would and if we were careful about laying out our terms of reference for coming up with these designs or ideas, again, making it very clear that this is not necessarily anything we're going to implement, but just to stimulate people's creativity, that might get a lot of people who haven't really thought too deeply and have funds, might get them interested in talking about putting some financial contributions. I just put that out there as an idea.
Councilmember Briggs, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to, that's certainly an interesting idea, Jeff, and nonprofits could definitely work on it in terms of what was allocated in council's budget. It was very specifically for kind of a formal RFP to be released and a formal design process to happen, in which the community would provide input on a final design that could be ideally, I think, with preliminary cost for building that design as well, so that we the community knows, we're moving forward on the proposal that was passed in 2018. So less brainstorming and kind of visioning, and more concretely moving towards exactly what we want on that site is what that particular pot of funding is my understanding of what council was working on for that. And the understanding was that $40,000 was not going to get us to that, so it would need to be matched by private dollars and potentially additional public dollars as well. We'll have to see.
Alan, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, well, this is my my close to my heart question. Open to all. I think our need is to make this question knowledgeable and available to everyone in Ann Arbor. I think that we need to, an outreach that goes as deeply as we can to every house and business and person in our city, that this is something developed for everyone, and everyone has an opportunity and a creative stake in it. That's what I described back when we looked at the short, medium, and long-term visions as the bottom-up plan that began with an outreach to everyone in Ann Arbor to begin to invite the creativity of the community, out of which could well come the kind of design competition or collaboration that Jeff described. And I resent that again in August. And I wish that we would look seriously at how to actually engage the communities of Ann Arbor in our diverse and varied and inclusive way. Then we begin to see how the communities can begin to fit in the various senses of this would be a place that is welcoming for everyone. And that is, I think, the objective that we have, that this somehow is seen as all of our places. And so far, our processes of community outreach have not actually outreached as far as we would hope. But that's what I think is the base out of which we look at the long-term plan and the drawing of some kind of creative vision that can spark the imagination and loosen the sea that the philanthropists of Ann Arbor put this on their agenda as something beautiful to see as their part of the heritage that they create. So I hope that we can look at what is really the outreach proposal possibilities plan that reaches everyone in Ann Arbor, that then draws forth the creativity into some kind of long-term plan. And that can then be modulated by professional consultants and so on that the city has allowed money for. But before that, I think we need a more rigorous outreach.
Frank and then Alice.
I've recently been giving thought to this, a need for a what I'll call a visioning process. And I think we need to look back to the task force for its final recommendations as a point of departure. I think we need to use that, and maybe it's a working group, maybe it's the Council of the Commons in general. We need to bring that forward into a more concise statement of the potential vision that we want the community, the block partners to begin reacting to, and that we want to get it to a point where we can engage professional design and development help. And I know there's a front end process to that effort to bring the community together, but it just seems like we need to ourselves, meaning the council, coalesce around a vision and somewhat inspired by what the task force has already provided us. So I think there's a sort of an intermediary step here that we need to take before we can even get to the wider community or to the consultants. I'm not an expert on this, but that's just my instinctive feeling that the visioning has to move along a little further before we can begin to engage on around a common vision.
Alice.
I'll try to be quick here. First of all, I needed to say that competitions are not fundraisers. I know that Jeff may have meant that it would stimulate a more fundraising effort, but I've seen all kinds of competitions that don't really, they're really a marketing kind of thing rather than a fundraising kind of thing, which can be good in some situations. Second, there should be some grants available. Even if we don't get the infrastructure bill that we might have been excited about nationally, there are grants out there. It takes a lot of work to dig for the ones that are appropriate for our vision. And that leads me to the fact that we need to express our vision with a compelling story. I've heard so much about storytelling as being the most effective way of bringing a concept or an inspiration to light, to reality. And so if we would start thinking more about what story we're trying to tell. Is it about Ann Arbor? Is it about the city? What is it about? And what are we trying to, where do we start from and where do we want to go? I think that's easier to think of than to think of a vision, which seems to have no direction. So that's just a suggestion, but maybe a different way of talking about it will help us sort of sharpen up our efforts. I hope so. Thanks.
Thanks, Alice. Jeff?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, yeah, I hear what people are saying, and I take fully on board what Erica and Alice have said. But I still say, well, for example, in the initiating committee, we have been doing some practice backcasting. In other words, imagining looking back from, say, 10 years from now or 5 years from now, and imagining what this whole thing looked like, in our minds. Each one of us has been started working on that. And then going back to the present and seeing how we got there, imagining how we got there. Sort of scenarios of the future, if you like. We've been working on stuff like that. And I think we should do more of that and maybe present some of that to the council here. Because that requires you to tell that story, from you describe from 5 or 10 years from now what happened and where, you describe where things arrived at. And in itself, tells you an interesting alternative reality or different kinds of reality that are possible. big corporations do this all the time, scenario planning. In fact, I studied under the guy who invented it, a guy called Pierre Vac at Shell International Petroleum Company. And it's a very powerful tool. And so we could do some of that. The other thing is, yes, competitions don't raise money directly, but they create excitement and they market the idea of a new, of an exciting possibility for Ann Arbor, for the center of the city, for the heart of the city, for how Ann Arbor sees itself. And you get engagement, you get a lot of engagement, and it's a much more rapid way to get out to the community than trying to, bring people in, individual by individual. If it gets a lot of public splash, if it gets a lot of media, it really it gets engagement. It gets people who want to see that there's something important happening. So that was kind of my logic. I wasn't trying to argue that, it would lead directly, immediately to money. And I take Erica's point, the money that was allocated by the city is probably much more of a formal kind of thing. But Alan is correct in saying that, we've got tremendous creative potential in our community. We got lots of brilliant, capable people, whether they're educated or not, that probably have a lot of ideas. And, while it's true we'd all love volunteers and people to be excited without some motivation, but money does talk sometimes. I mean, if people get the possibility of doing something incredibly creative and getting rewarded for it, it's sort of like having a lottery ticket, right? I'll put my ideas out there and I'll win a bit of the lottery. That has motivated people to do some incredible things. And we've seen this in 5 or 10 different cities in the United States. I could send around a list where they ran these kind of competitions and got incredible designs for key central areas of their cities. So I'm just, proposing that people think a little bit more about that. Okay, thanks.
I'd like to make a proposal here. So, I think on the fundraising side of things, we do need to have some actual discussion and planning around how we're going to close the gap on the private side of the fundraising mechanism. Councilmember Briggs has brought up, the $40,000. One, I think mathematically we all accept that that's not sufficient to actually handle the planning for this type of endeavor. But there is an expectation by City Council that we provide some matching funds, or that the matching funds are put into it. I think we need to have a real serious discussion about how we're going to get those matching funds and where they're going to come from. And so I do want to stick to a notion of, if there, I think Frank, you and maybe Alice, myself, and Erica maybe should be on this sort of working group to talk about where we're going to go on this fundraising side of things. Is that acceptable to folks? I just don't want us to get caught as we spiral on some of these other things without having a fundraising plan.
Yes, Adam, I would be willing to do that because I do think I've seen that, as hard as it is, grants do come along. You have to evaluate them, but they are out there. It just takes a lot of time to get them going. And some of them do require matching, and we would have matching already. So.
Totally. Thank you, Alice. Frank, you're good too?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Alan, did you have a question about this?
Well, I think this is a good idea. I had a conversation with Frank from the initiating committee in Library Green, and I've been very concerned about fundraising. I put out a list of quite a number of sources and foundations that I think are very likely, if possible, some with which I have connections. And so I'd like to, I don't know exactly how the form of this, but I'd like to be able to put my 2 cents into this process. I think that there's a lot of money for the kinds of things we are doing in little bits and pieces, and probably some big money as the vision comes more together. but I do have some thoughts.
Alan, I think it's going to take more than 2 cents.
Well, I got some bigger senses than that too. And when we put together the initial A2C2, as Alice will remember, basically we were talking about financing with bake sales, and Dennis Dahlman.
I wasn't. I'm a baker. I know how much work that would be.
And Dennis Dahlman came up with $2.5 million. But neither was adequate because the city was not really looking to do that. Now the people said, well, we want to do this. And so between the financiers and philanthropists and the bake sales, I think we can certainly address the money question. It does involve an enthusiasm from people that this is something that is beautiful that they want to get involved in. But there are foundations that will find this is very desirable from their own perspective. So let's go for it.
Yep, Alan, we'll include you in that discussion then too. On the long-term design planning, I think it's important that, I'd like us to see, and we don't have to make this happen today, but I would like us to see that we set a goal for ourselves, that we need to establish a date for when we're working towards to get a formal design going, and hire a firm. And so, I think that's very important. I think that's important for the progress. I think that's, I'll speak to, I guess I'll let our council member here speak to what the expectation of city council is, but I think this is very important. And I think that, we're a few months into this now. We're doing some good work. We got a lot of working groups going. We should set a goal.
Yeah, I mean, I would certainly hope that we reached the next budget cycle and we would have gone out for an RFP and, if not had responses back, at least have one out. I don't know, Heather, we've been talking a little bit about this, but, and I don't know it's sort of realistic from your perspective. I could imagine, you may be beginning to work on RFP and then bring it back to this group for some feedback and some refinement, so that it's easier sometimes to react to something than it is to start from scratch in this type of forum. But does late January seem like a reasonable timeframe that we might be able to get something out, or what? I'd certainly welcome your thoughts from the staff side on this.
Yeah, sure. You mean to get an RFP out on the streets? Is that what you're saying? Yeah, I think that's feasible. And the idea behind that, just so everybody is aware, is to put something out there to get a sense of what the budget would be like, and so that there can be a sense of how much money is needed to be raised. And we would clarify that in the RFP, saying that there is still, we have some of the money and the rest of the money needs to be secured. I could start drafting that RFP now, at the next meeting in December, I could bring that forward for people to review. So it just depends on the review time, what kind of tweaking needs to be done to the RFP in terms of how quickly we can get that out, if everybody's comfortable with it.
I think we could well do with some kind of understanding among us all what an RFP really looks like, what kind of information is required, and because that is what we have to work with as a structure to get the funds budgeted and to understand what the scale of the funding is and what the scope of the request is. It's probably much more important for us to understand the scope. It will also be combined with our story and all of that. It's going to be a very integrative kind of process from all of the things that we're doing. And if we don't know what format is required, what results we're looking for, we'll be continuing until another year, best January. So yeah, I agree, but I think sooner that all of us are familiar with what an RFP looks like and whether we want to go with certain paragraphs and certain not to go with others, the scoping, in other words, we should be prepared to do that by the time we see what we can use from the information that we're getting now and have gotten already.
And we do have a standard RFP format. Sorry to jump in, Adam, but just so everybody knows, we do have a standard RFP format.
Right.
So there'll be many portions of it that can't be changed, but parts that can be changed, I'll highlight in yellow. And so I'll write up a draft scope. And so, those other details of what we might be looking for, and then we can go from there.
I think that sounds good. Alan, I know you got your hand up here. I did want to emphasize too, I know we have a lot of work to do, and I think the last meeting we heard from everyone that we wanted to be doing a lot of this work before we finalize an RFP in terms of block partner outreach in particular, and understanding what we don't know, frankly, from other communities. I think it's great that we work on those things simultaneously, and I do think having a goal is going to be very important. So we need something to work to. Alan, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I don't mind looking at an RFP. To think of anything like that formalized by the end of January without much more discussion we have had about the community outreach and actually involving the people of Ann Arbor in this plan is very premature. So I want us to attend to the bottom-up details and see how that fits in or precedes the RFP and the other working groups that we have going. So I'm glad to move things along as quickly as I can, but not to ignore the actual people of Ann Arbor as a generating force of this.
Councilmember Briggs and Heather.
Well, Heather's welcome to go first. She may have.
Sure.
Well, we do have a lot of community input through the task force. I mean, hundreds of people participated in that process. And then something else to keep in mind is that what we would be putting an RFP out for is a planning process, a planning and design process, which would then engage citizens, which would engage residents along the way. So the engagement would be baked right into that effort. So I think, we would be delaying things unnecessarily if we did a community engagement effort. Also keeping in mind that this group is an advisory group, so it would really be up to city staff to do that engagement effort. And right now we kind of don't have the capacity, outside of a specific project the funding is allocated for.
Yeah, Heather said it much more eloquently than I could have. Just to add to that, I think to respect the work that has been done previously with the Center of the City Task Force and all of the information that was collected in that, I think it's important that we utilize that and hopefully that's able to inform us on RFP and then really utilizing the skills of a consultant that'll come in and help us do inclusive and wide outreach on the designing process.
Frank.
Just wanted to echo Heather and Erica. I think we've got to really rely on the task force. There was a lot of community input. There were a couple of public meetings. I just endorse that approach. And let's move forward. I don't think we really need to go back to the entire community from sort of ground zero and try to build awareness and reaction from the broader community. I think we have a lot of that. The consultants will help us get more. We've got to move this along.
So I think maybe the next best step, Heather's got a action item for herself, and I think that'll be really helpful. So why don't we, plan on bringing this up again at the next meeting, of a chance to take a look at the standard RFP that the city has. We obviously have a lot of work going on in the working groups simultaneous to that. I think that will inform a lot of our ability to start the RFP process. And then as Frank and Heather and Erica have said, there will be a lot of opportunity to shape that as it starts with formal consultants. So I think that we've got our work cut out for us over the next couple of months at a minimum. Um, unless there's anything else on the agenda, we can go to public comment. I see at least one person popping up here. Two.
Yes. All right, I'm going to call on the phone number that ends in 326. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Hello, this is Jeff Crockett calling. I assume you can all hear me.
We can.
So I, for one, am very disappointed that gardens were not mentioned at all as a means to activate the commons. I mean, this is the third time I've listened to the meeting. I've made 2 presentations, talked about Joette Rioma and the possibility, exciting possibility of connecting with Project Grow. And it just seems like this is a great way to activate the commons at very low cost. So I'm very disappointed in that. And I am hoping that you will consider at a future meeting a presentation from Joette Rioma on Project Grow and the possibilities. We have 14 plots of land that could be used as garden sites, which would support sustainability and also support activization of the site. Because when you have people, a whole bunch of people building gardens, that involves people and their friends and their relatives coming to take a look. It involves people from downtown on Saturday night walking and looking at the gardens and commenting. It seems like that's an easy call. But the other thing I question is how the concern is for potential impact of the commons from Main Street merchants when there appears to be little concern about the impact of Sonic Thursdays on the food trucks on Liberty. If you have the concern for the one, then how come there isn't a request to remove the food trucks on Liberty to support the Liberty Street businesses? It just doesn't make sense. And the last thing I would like to say is that I attended recently, I was in Plymouth quite unexpectedly for the Pumpkin Palooza event. And it was an event on Kellogg Park where local businesses and civic organizations and a whole bunch of different people put up displays around the theme of pumpkins. So it displayed community involvement, but it also supported local business by having businesses put together these displays. So I don't think this is too terribly complicated, and I think you can schedule, in regards to what Jeff was saying, in a sense it's sort of a competition, but just create a few events, you know, and connect with the Ann Arbor Chamber of Commerce, who, by the way, is very critical in the involvement of the activation of commons in Plymouth. So connect with the Ann Arbor Chamber of Commerce and jointly plan an event. I greatly appreciate your time in considering these suggestions. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff.
All right, now we have Robert Black.
Thank you, Heather. And thank you again for your great work together tonight. I think you guys are learning. Peter Senge, a great consultant for businesses, talked about team learning in a learning organization, and I think you're doing it. Mr. Dohoney, welcome. I'm happy to see you here. And from the words of your experience in Cincinnati and Kentucky and other places, I think the rest of this group needs to see that you have just landed a real ally and asset into your process. So kudos to that. Just a quick side story that I'll share for 1 minute. Frank and Rita and I walked down Liberty Street and into Liberty Plaza, and there was a gentleman sitting on the brick wall there. He had a couple of teeth missing, but we sat with him and talked to him. And Rita asked him the question, what is it that you love about this place? He says, well, they have Sonic Fridays, they have a lunch there, and there's music, and I love that. His water bottle and sleeping bag were under the overhang of the First Martin building next door. And it had just rained a torrent just a couple days before. And I said, did you get wet? He said, no, I was sheltered there. And then he said, what I love is that the church brings in pizza on Friday nights for me and others who are here. And then we said, well, what else do you do? He says, well, I clean up the place when people leave. So just Alan's comment about engaging the people that are actively there. Rita and Frank could tell you more details about this gentleman, but it was a really neat engagement and a learning for us. So kudos to your learning. And I'd suggest you continue to engage volunteers to give their time and labor. Mr. Crockett is right on that. Engaging volunteers builds a goodwill where they give their time and their labor into a process. And as you do that, you will continue to build a story like the compelling story of the gardens, which Alice Ralph was talking about, the idea of having a story. And to create a future vision, you don't have to have a competition. You need more like a collaboration of imagination. And you end up with 3 or 5 different scenarios that people can show and you can dream about, think about. I worked with a school in Copley, Ohio, that used the 4th grade teacher and its 21 students to create a picture of doorways within the school that was an imagination for the 200 people I facilitated a meeting in the gym with. And they were inspired by that. If you look at other examples like Stefan Trendoff, who had an article in MLive, there are stimulating and encouraging ideas that would get people to think about this in a better way. So I just encourage you to keep reaching out. When I was chair of the Energy Commission, we moved the meeting from City Hall, from the dark windows of the basement up into the county building and started putting it on TV. And we structured the meeting with working committees, just like you're doing. And it was on TV, on public TV and public access TV. And we had a following, we had an audience. People would talk to us about the meetings afterwards. And I don't know how many people are watching this right now, but it would be really cool if you had 100 people watching this meeting every time and they called in afterwards or started to engage you in this process of outreach. So I encourage you to keep going and reach out and including. The idea of inclusiveness is really powerful here. And I just look forward to you moving ahead. And last thing I'll say is, January is far too early to issue an RFP. I'd be careful that you use the words final design because it is not going to be a final design. The paradigms of the world have changed. There is not going to be a 17-story one and done building on this site. The voters said no. What there will be is a framework for a future plan that will engage the new director of the library, engage Mike Martin and the First Martin Group to participate, and you will create the park and civic center out of a joint collaboration that Mr. Haber has been talking about and Professor Henney. So just remember that and take a walk down there like Frank and Rita did and talk to some of those people and see what happens. Good luck with your next work. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Is there any other members of the public, Heather? Okay. All right. In that case, it's been a wonderful evening, and can we have a motion for adjournment?
Move to adjourn.
All right, seconded by several. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right, any opposed? Excellent. That motion carries. We will see you soon on the working groups.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you. Have a good night.